Let's start with 5 guys who teams should look to add this week.
Yeah, and keep in mind, these are players who are owned in 20% of leagues or less. And let's start right there in Buffalo. I think there's sort of 2 options at running back to fill in for C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson. Anthony Dixon, who we saw on Sunday, he had 66 yards on 16 total touches, but more of a power plotter. The player to keep in mind, I think, also is Bryce Brown, who didn't play. He hasn't even been active for the Bills this season, but he's a terrific athlete, the former LaShawn McCoy backup, a major high school recruit back in the day, but this is a player who has to avoid fumbles. Next one to keep in mind, Trey Mason, 2.3% ownership, 23 carries, 125 yards and a touchdown over his past 2 games. The Rams are going with the hot hand at running back. The limiting factor here for Trey Mason, not much of a factor in the passing game, but he's a player who's run the ball so well, you have to keep him on the radar. And this is a player, speaking of Jerick McKinnon, 21 total touches in Week 7, 103 yards against a Bills run defense that hadn't allowed more than 82 since Week 1. 21-7 in terms of total touches from McKinnon versus Matt Asiata. Very good player, owned in less than 12% of leagues. And then Denard Shoelace Robinson, the former Michigan quarterback, 127 rushing yards and a touchdown against the Bears in Week 7. Against the Browns, And some of it, as you know, Jay, is a little bit matchup driven because the Browns let up so many rushing yards. But he looks to be the Jaguars' starting running back going forward, and a starting running back role always has value. The last one here, Odell Beckham Jr., the Giants' first-round pick, and of course, with Victor Cruz out for this season, someone's going to have to see an uptick in terms of overall production. Found the end zone twice on Sunday, a very talented player who could eventually become a weekly starter if his ascension continues over the next handful of games.
I'm surprised he's still available in so many leagues.
It's amazing.
Because the upside for him is great. Some of us have a hard time knowing when to cut bait with a player. Maybe it's because of their name or their history. Give us some guys that their time is done this year. We need to release them.
And a lot of times it is names. Let's start with Matt Asiata, the Vikings running back, who really became fantasy relevant because of the circumstances surrounding Adrian Peterson. But he has only 8 carries over the past 2 weeks and 4 total points. He's owned in 54.3% of leagues. But clearly McKinnon is the most talented Vikings running back. And Matt Asiata, he might have won you a week if you picked him up earlier this season. He had that 3-touchdown game, but this is a player you can move on from. And let's keep it right there with the Vikings because Greg Jennings is owned in nearly 90% of leagues, but he has 1 touchdown this season. It came all the way back in Week 1, and he has yet to surpass 100 receiving yards in a single game. I think this is the point of the fantasy season where you look for more higher upside players rather than veterans who we know sort of what they're all about. And let's face it, this Minnesota Vikings passing game simply not productive enough to have a fantasy wide receiver there. Another name to keep in mind, Dwayne Bowe, another big name, 78% ownership. He has no touchdowns thus far this season. We know the Chiefs, they like to get things going on the ground with Jamal Charles. Dwayne Bowe has averaged just 5.4 yards per game. I don't think the ceiling is all that high for Dwayne Bowe. He's a player to move on from. And finally, Riley Cooper, a fantasy superstar in 2013, but a lot of it was due to the fact that he found the end zone a bunch and averaged 18 or nearly 18 yards per catch. He has only 1 touchdown this season. His yards per catch average, Jay, it's down to 9 yards. No big plays, no touchdowns means Riley Cooper is droppable in fantasy.
All of that fantastic information. I'm set for a win this week.
There you go.
Feel thanks.